In the beginning, there was dark, and God said, "Let there be light." And he saw that the light was good.
Regardless of whether you believe that God said, "Let there be light," or whether you believe there was simply a Big Bang, I think we can all agree that when the light showed up, it must have been the best fireworks show ever. And I think we can also agree that when the light shows up, that it is good. The light, it was and always will be better than the dark. Dark is less, light is best. Life is a journey we fully appreciate and recognize. To reach our destination, best, we each have a mountain to climb. We understand and accept that it will be dark at times on our way to the top of the mountain. Our Personal and Professional Best program is all about leaving the dark behind and intentionally pursuing the light. It's about climbing our mountain and becoming our best. And best begins and ends with relationships, because relationships are the most important part of life. They're also the most challenging and often the most painful part of our lives. In fact, relationships can be the darkest part of our lives. So why don't we simply choose to do what's best in our relationships? Well, it's not natural to do so. The scripture tells us what is natural. In Romans 7:15, the scripture tells us that for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. Statistics confirm this truth all too often. As we don't choose the light, we don't choose to love everybody better. At home, in our marriages, with our significant others, with our children and family, with our coworkers and customers, and sadly, with our neighbors.
We all know that there's a really simple solution to getting better at relationships in life.
And it goes like this. If everyone else in my life would simply say what they're supposed to say, how they're supposed to say it, and do what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to do it, according to me, it would be easy to love everybody better. But they won't. They don't. Well, they just can't. Fortunately, the light showed up and showed us how to love everybody better. No, it's not natural, but it is best. Even when you decide to choose the light in relationships, the dark will show back up. In fact, darkness will show up every day in our relationships with painful words, with painful actions, with selfishness. And it can hurt us and keep us from getting to the top of our mountain if we choose to let it. Or we can do what is unnatural. We can do what the best do. We can choose to live in the light.
Today, we continue our journey to best. Today, we keep climbing.
We keep serving. We keep sacrificing. We keep forgiving. We keep loving no matter what. Because when the light showed up, that's what the light did for us. It accepted us. It served us. It sacrificed for us. It forgave us. The light loved us. Today we continue our journey to the top of the mountain. Today we pursue the light.
Today, we learn how to love everybody better. Gary Chapman, welcome to Personal and Professional Best.
Well, thank you, Patrick. It's great to be with you today.
You know, I am really excited for our audience today to be able to meet you and to gain wisdom about this concept of love. Let me start out, though, by asking you a question. How does it happen that an associate pastor whose professional focus is on counseling, after 20 years of counseling, how did you decide to write a book, and that book now would be translated in 49 languages and sell 14 million copies, and it's a bestseller every year? How did this happen?
Well, I'll give you the background. It was years ago. A couple came into my office, and they sat down, and the wife said, "Well, let me tell you a few things about us, Dr. Chapman," because I didn't know them. And she said, we don't argue, and we don't have any money problems. And she went on with 2 or 3 more positive things, and I was beginning to wonder, did they come in here to tell me what a good marriage they had? And then she started crying, And she said, "But the problem is, Dr. Chapman, I just don't feel any love coming from him. We're like roommates. We just live in the same house, and we're cordial to each other, but there's nothing going on between us." And she said, "I just feel empty inside, and I don't know how much longer I can go on like this." I looked over at her husband, and he said, "I don't understand her. I do everything I can to show her that I love her, and she sits there and says she doesn't feel loved." And I said, "Well, what do you do to show your love?" He said, "Well, I get home from work before she does, so I start the evening meal. And sometimes I have it ready when she gets there." And he said, "If not, she'll help me. And then we eat. And after we eat," he said, "I wash the dishes. And every Thursday night, I vacuum the floors. And every Saturday, I wash the car and mow the grass and help her with the laundry." And he went on, and I was beginning to wonder, what does this woman do? It sounded to me like he was doing everything. And I looked back at her, and she started crying again. And she said, "Dr. Chapman, he's right. He's a hard-working man." She said, "But we don't ever talk. We haven't talked in 20 years. He's always mowing the grass, washing the dishes, vacuuming, always doing something." And I realized here's a husband who is sincere, loving his wife the best way he knows how, and a wife who doesn't get it. And after that, I had similar experiences over and over in my counseling office. And I knew there had to be a pattern to what I was hearing, but I had no idea what it was. So what I did was to sit down and read several years of notes that I made when I was counseling and ask myself, when someone sat in my office and said, "I feel like my spouse doesn't love me," what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories. And I later called them the 5 love languages. So I started using that in my counseling, that if you want her to feel love, you got to express love in her language. You want him to feel love, you got to express love in his language. And I would help them discover each other's love language, challenge them to go home and try it. And sometimes, Patrick, they'd come back in 3 weeks and say, "Gary, this is changing everything. The whole climate's different now." And then I started using with small groups of couples, and the same thing happened. Probably 5 years later, I thought, if I could put this concept in a book, write it in the language of the common person, leave out psychological jargon, maybe I could help a lot of couples that I would never have time to see in my office. That's what motivated me to write the book. Of course, little did I know it would sell like it has now for 28 years or so. Every year sells more than the year before. That doesn't happen to books, So I think it's really speaking to that deep emotional need we have to feel loved. And it's helping couples know how to meet that need after you come down off the high, the super high of the falling in love or being in love.
There's so many important things in what you just said, but the one thing that jumps out at me is you didn't write the book to sell books and to make money. You wrote the book to help other people. And, anytime we get our purpose right in life and do things, the extraordinary is possible. And that's what took place. While we're on the topic of the 5 love languages, tell us what they are. Tell us the 5 love languages.
Okay. Yeah, and there's no particular order of these, but one is words of affirmation. You look nice in that outfit. Really appreciate what you did. One of the things I like about you, it's just looking for things that you can commend them for, I had a lady tell me not too long ago, she said, "Dr. Chapman, I know it would be good if I could give him positive words." She said, "But to be honest with you, I can't think of anything good to say about him.
That's a different counseling problem.
And I said to her, I sat there a moment, and then I said, does he ever take a shower? And she said, well, yes. I said, well, how often? She said, well, every day. I said, if I were you, I'd start there. I've never met a man, never met a woman, you couldn't find something good to say about them. For some people, this is their love language. Then there's acts of service, doing something for the other person. In a marriage, that would be things like washing dishes and vacuuming floors and washing cars and walking dogs and changing babies' diapers. Ooh, that's a big one. That's what the gentleman was doing that was in my office. He was speaking acts of service. You know the old saying, Patrick, actions speak louder than words. It's true if this is your love language. It's not true for everyone, but if it's your love language, it will be true. And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. You know, before I studied counseling, I did an undergrad and a master's degree in anthropology, the study of cultures. We've never discovered a culture anywhere in the world where gift giving is not an expression of love. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. And the gifts don't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts. But I like to remind people, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head, you know? You can pick up a stone in a city parking lot and give it to an 8-year-old boy and say, hey, man, I found this today and I thought about you. Look at the colors in this thing, man. If gifts is his love language, you'll find that stone in his dresser drawer when he's 23, and he'll remember the day you gave it to him.
Wow.
You know, a guy told me the other day, he said, Dr. Chapman, I was just taking a walk, and I saw a bird feather, and I picked it up and took it home to my wife. And I said, honey, I found this feather when I was walking. I want to give it to you because it reminds me that you are the wind beneath my wings, girl. I love you. Woo! Didn't cost him a penny. He gave a gift and words of affirmation.
Right. He checked a couple boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's gifts, and then there's quality time, giving the other person your undivided attention. I do not mean sitting on the couch watching television. Someone else has your attention. I'm talking about TV off, computers down. We're not answering our phone. We're looking at each other. We're listening and interfacing, and we have each other's undivided attention. Or walking down the street together, taking a walk together and talking, or going out to eat, assuming that you talk. I'm sure you've noticed what I've noticed in restaurants. Husband and wife sitting across from each other in the restaurant, each of them looking at their phone.
I've seen whole families doing it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I'm wondering, I was wondering, are they talking to each other or are they talking to someone else?
So quality time is giving them your undivided attention. And it's not always talking. You could be planting a flower garden in the front yard. But the important thing is not the flower garden. It's that the two of you are doing this together, giving your undivided attention to each other to accomplish a project together. So, and then number 5 is physical touch. We've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies, hold them, kiss them, cuddle them. Long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. In a marriage, there would be such things as holding hands, kissing, embracing, the whole sexual part of marriage, arm around the shoulder, driving down the road, you put your hand on their leg, sitting around the house and they'll walk by and you trip them. No, don't trip your spouse, okay? So the basic idea is out of the 5, each of us has a primary love language. One of the 5 speaks more deeply to us than the other 4. And it's very similar to spoken language. Every one of us grew up speaking a language with a dialect. That's the one we understand best. We call it our native tongue. I grew up speaking English Southern style, okay? But everyone grew up with a language and a dialect. And the same thing is true with love. And so if you're going to communicate love effectively on the emotional level, you got to learn to speak the other person's love language.
So you counseled for years. You're hearing the needs, the problems, the frustrations. You discover through this couple who, by the way, do they get royalties on the book? Have they asked?
They have not asked, and I have not offered.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. When you wrote it, at that time, did you have any idea that it was going to have the influence and the impact in the world that it has?
Well, the short answer is no. Now, I did know that it worked. I knew they would help people. I knew it would be effective in meeting the need for love, because I'd been using it, for several years. But no, I had no idea. And neither did the publisher. The publisher told me, he said, well, we read the manuscript and we thought, well, this is a nice thought. We'd probably sell a few thousand copies, And the first year, I think it only sold 4,000 copies. And the next year was 8,000. And then it kept doubling for a while. And then it just kept going up. So no, I didn't expect it. Neither did the publisher.
One of the friends of our show, Bob Goff, last year, we had Bob on, and
oh yeah, I know Bob.
He's an interesting and fascinating guy, that's for sure. But he talked about love does, and I think that gets at this conversation, right? Because love, you feel it, but the actions that we take and the things that we think turn into action, the other person experiences, whether it's the feather or it's the rock or any other number of things, right? The other person needs to experience love in the way that they do. And we're going to get to that in just a second. I want to personally thank you, because Lisa and I have been married 36 years, and we've been extraordinarily well married, but we got even better married 20 years ago when we did a small group and we read the 5 love languages. It was an enlightenment. It was just a huge enlightenment. And I'll tell you a quick story. We were at a Christmas time, and it was family kind of celebration. It wasn't Christmas Eve. It was just prior to that. So we had a house full of family, and I was on the couch with my younger son, Kenzie. He's probably 12 years old at the time. And Lisa had been preparing. She had a pineapple. She's never done this before. And she was scooping it out, and we're doing chicken salad. And she's got this whole thing going on, and we're watching football, me and my son, and we're just really happy. And we're within earshot of Lisa in the kitchen. And my son says, Pops, what are we having for dinner? I said, I don't know. He said, I don't think I'm going to like it. I said, well, why don't you just order a pizza? The night ended right there. Come to find out, when we did the 5 love languages, Lisa's acts of service. So she had been expressing that act of service to us the entire day, showing her family her love in the way that she shows it. And I immediately discounted all of it. And I was like, what happened? If he doesn't like chicken salad, it's okay. Oh, yeah. But it was when a couple of years later we did your book, it was a significant enlightenment. And now we both understand our love languages. And mine is words of affirmation and physical touch. And Lisa is about quality time and about acts of service. Yeah. So I was thinking about that couple you were talking about earlier. My wife would have loved to have been married to that guy. She would have said, that guy is something else. So now that we've talked a little bit about that, where does it source from? Where do these love languages source from? Can you help us a little bit, maybe think about that? Like mine, as I thought about it, I thought, my dad was a physical touch guy. And because my mama left us when we were young, his touch, I think back of it now, when he hugged me, it made me feel secure. And then whenever he would say Patrick and say something affirming about me, still to today, 82 years old, when he says, and I'm 58, when he says, Patrick, I'm proud of you, I'm like, you are? Where does it come from?
Patrick, I don't have a full answer to that. It may well be influenced by parental interaction, but I do know this. You can discover a child's primary love language at least by the time they're 4 years old, sometimes earlier, by simply observing their behavior. How do they respond to you and other people? When my son was that age, I would come home in the afternoon. He would run to the door, grab my leg, and climb on me. He's touching me because he wants to be touched. Our daughter never did that. At that age, she would say, Daddy, come into my room. I want to show you something. She wanted my undivided attention. Yeah, so it's there very early. So I don't know if it's nature or nurture or a combination of the two, probably a combination of the two.
But it's the enlightenment that you gave to all of now the 14 million and all the other audiences that may not have bought the book, but have listened to you talk about this topic. And it's cascaded, because I know many people who know of the love languages have not yet read it. We're going to hope to change some of that for my circle at the end of today. Not that you need to sell any more books, but I really think that then when you think about what's going on in society today, whether it's in people's homes with their families, the estrangement, not only with marriages, with significant others, but with children. When you think about what happens in the workplace, when you think about our neighbors, and God called us to love our neighbor, and there wasn't a list of conditions about anything. It was just to love our neighbor. And then when I think about it, it's just the business that we're in, our customers, some of them are, let's just say, more difficult to love than others.
Yes.
But does this concept, does the 5 love languages, does it transcend the marital relationship and cascade into every other aspect of our life?
Well, you know, that's one of the things that also surprised me, because I discovered it, as I shared earlier, in the context of marriage, married couples. But I realized rather early on, this applied to children as well. And so I teamed up with Dr. Ross Campbell, who was a psychiatrist in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He's in heaven now. But he had worked with children for 30 years, and we wrote the 5 love languages of children. Same 5 languages, but applying it to the children. And I say to parents, the question is not, do you love your children? The question is, do your children feel loved? Mm. You know, he's 13 years old. He ran away from home. He ends up in my office. And in my talking to him, he says to me, my parents don't love me. They love my brother. They don't love me. Wow. I knew his parents. I knew they loved him. The problem was they had never learned how to communicate love to him in a way that he would feel loved. So yeah, that was the second step, was the children. And then the teenagers, because parents would say to me after a while, you know, we read your book on children. It really, really helped. But now they're teenagers, and it doesn't seem to be working.
I hear that about millennials a lot too.
Yeah, and they would say, does their love language change when they get to be teenagers? And I said, I don't think it changes, but you have to use new dialects, because whatever you've been doing, they now consider childish. So if it's words, you got to change the words, make more adult words, you know. If it's physical touch, you got to start wrestling them and hitting them on the shoulder, you know, rather than putting them on your lap. So anyway, he went from that. And then single adults started saying to me, you know, Gary, this applies in my dating relationships, right? I said, yes. And not only that, but in your relationship with your parents and your siblings and your college roommates. So I wrote the one for singles. And by and by, over the years, so many people in work situations would say, I know you wrote that book for marriage, but I've been using it at work. And it really does change the climate of the place. And I had, I don't know, half a dozen people want to write books with me on that topic. And I never felt really there was the right person until I met Dr. Paul White, who is a psychologist who lives in Wichita. And he had been working with business leaders for 20 years. And he said, Gary, I think this would absolutely transform the emotional climate of the workplace. And I said, well, let's do some research and make sure it's true. So he went for 2 years, 2.5 years, he went into businesses, and he would share the concept of what we call the 5 languages of appreciation. We changed the word for the workplace. It's the same, meeting the same need, though, the need to be valued as a person. And he would share well, first of all, he would give them a job satisfaction test. And then he would share the concept and let everybody take the profile. We call it the MBA profile, Motivating by Appreciation profile, and learn everybody's primary and secondary languages, and the one that's least important, because you're kind of wasting your time on that one. And then he would go back a year later and give another job satisfaction test. And in every case, it was statistically improved. So I said, okay, let's go for it. So we wrote the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace, and it has had a tremendous response. He's been in Fortune 500 companies and small companies, all the way from beauty salons to carpenters and construction workers. And because everybody wants to feel appreciated in the workplace, that I'm not just a cog in the wheel. I'm a person, and I'm appreciated not only for what I'm doing, but I'm appreciated as a person. So, yeah, it's been amazing, the response we've had to how this applies in the workplace.
Well, I know that you and I have similar faith, and we believe in truth, and we believe in absolute truth. And so if it's true that there are these 5 love languages, and once you read the book, and once you experience reflection on your own life and that of your spouse, your significant other, or your children, you realize that it is true, that there's a natural part of us that is drawn to be loved in certain ways. So when I think about God's call for us to love our neighbor, to me, I saw it as an opportunity to take the love languages with me everywhere, right? And I'm constantly engaging with people with the idea of not trying to make a profit in the workplace, but trying to create value for the life of another human being in the workplace. And similar to yourself, I haven't sold 14 million books, but we've sold 350,000 mortgages. So
All right.
we do something different, but we love on our people. We're a serial best place to work, and we love on our customers. That's what it says here, deliver the industry's best experience. And it's genuine. It's not a pathway for us to make money. It's a pathway for us to express our love for our neighbor, whether it's coworkers or whether it's customers. How do we, when we're outside of the relationship at home where we spend a lot of time, how do you recommend that we assess another, whether it's a coworker or assess a customer or a neighbor or a stranger? How do we bring the love languages to that? How do we assess what their language is?
Well, obviously it depends on how much contact you have with them, and we have more contact with some people than we do others in the workplace. But one is to observe their behavior. How do they respond to other people? Because typically people speak their own love language. So if you hear them always giving encouraging words to people, then words of affirmation is likely their love language. It's what they want to receive. If they're always giving gifts to people, that's a clue that gifts would be their language. If they're always giving high fives to people or hitting them on the shoulder, you can assume physical touch is their language. So observe their behavior. Secondly, what do they complain about most often? The complaint reveals their love language. If they say, for example, in fact, one lady said to us, if my boss ever did anything to help me, I would drop dead. Her words were, if he ever lifted a hand to help me. Well, acts of service is her language. Right. She's complaining that he doesn't do anything to help her. So listen to the complaints of the people. And this will come out typically with people that you relate to quite often because they feel comfortable now to share a complaint with you. And then what do they request most often? If you get ready to go on a business trip, for example, and they say to you, be sure and bring me a surprise. They're asking you for a gift, you know. So listen to what they ask for. And this applies to, I remember, I'm thinking of children now. A 6-year-old said to his mother, we don't ever go to the park anymore since the baby came. See, he and his mother used to go to the park and have quality time. Now the baby's here, he's not getting it. So what do they complain about and what do they request most often? Those are the informal ways. Now, you know, in a business, if you want to permeate the whole work group, it'd be ideal if the whole work group would take the MBA inventory. And with every book, there comes a code to get a free inventory that will give you your primary, secondary, and the one that's least important. And just imagine if you knew that with all the people that you work with, and all of you, if you wanted to express appreciation, now you knew how to do it in the most effective manner. It really does change the climate.
Yeah, you know, I think because we start out naturally selfish, we start with self. We sometimes void the possibility of, we do void the possibility of being our best in a relationship because we're not really thinking about the need of another because we're thinking about our own. And if we would just be intentional about thinking about the 5 love languages and about the needs of another, you just said so many subtle but important things that would allow you to pick up on someone else's love language if we were just paying closer attention. And I think, loving thy neighbor calls us to pay closer attention and get away from being selfish and become selfless, in which case then all we have to do is read your book and understand exactly what the languages are so that we become expert in knowing how we can be best invested in other people. And, our whole program is about becoming our personal, professional best, becoming the best version of ourselves. And I've never met a single person who found fulfillment in life, personal, professional best, without being great in relationship. And those people that are great in relationship kind of naturally understand, without using the languages that they naturally understand it. I was thinking when I asked the question, what if we just did all 5 for everyone that was in our life? Right. If we just covered them up in acts of service and in gifts and in words of affirmation and well, maybe physical touch wouldn't work with everyone, right? But if we did that, we would no doubt cover what we don't know, but we would most likely touch an area where they would best react to us, and then we would probably find it.
Yeah, and I think if you did that, you would find that when you hit the primary, you'd see a much greater response to that than you did.
It'd be like pushing buttons, and all of a sudden you go, "I got it."
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question: if someone here today in a relationship, marital relationship, if they're in a relationship with their significant other, their children, if they're struggling, what recommendation do you have for them? I'm making this easy for you, Gary.
Yeah. Well, two things. And the first one might surprise you. I think in a troubled relationship, you begin with an apology. Why do I say that? Because in a troubled relationship, there's been things that have happened along the way that have put emotional blocks in a wall between the two of you. And it's hard to relate to each other positively when there's a wall between you. And the only way you tear down walls is to apologize for your part in the past failures. Now, one lady said, "Okay, Gary, I get that, but what if the problem really is him?" I said, "Okay. Let's assume that your husband is 95% of the problem, and that would only leave 5% for you. You deal with your 5%, and you tell him, 'Honey, I've been thinking about us. I've been looking back on our lives, and I realize I've failed you in several ways. And I want to share them with you, and I want to ask you if you can find in your heart to forgive me.' Now, I'm not going to guarantee he'll forgive you at that moment, but he's going to walk away, and he's going to say to himself, 'Man, this is different. All I've ever heard is condemnation. Now she's apologizing to me.'" You see, that can touch his heart and in due time bring him back to apologize. Once you apologize, you don't sit around waiting for him to apologize, or her, you can go the other way. Then you start speaking their primary love language. And you do it not for 3 weeks, you do it for 6 months. And I can't guarantee it, but I've seen it over and over and over again. When you take that approach, apologize, and then start loving them in the right love language, they begin to come back somewhere down that line, that 6-month stretch, and say, "What can I do to help you?" And now you get to share something that would speak to you. It's the idea that love stimulates love. You mentioned the whole spiritual part of the life, Patrick. The scriptures say we love God because God first loved us.
Right.
And I wrote a whole book on God speaks your love language, and God touches us, and then we reciprocate. And the same principle is true in human relationships. It's true you can't change the other person, but you can influence the other person. And the most powerful influence you can have is to tear down the walls of past failure and then love them unconditionally in the right love language, and you're having the greatest impact and influence you could have on them.
That was incredibly powerful, and not in necessarily the 5 love language book, but I've told people over and over again, Gary, that you'll never have a meaningful, long-term, loving relationship without saying, "I apologize."
Yeah.
And without forgiving another human being.
Yeah.
Because inevitably, none of us are perfect, and we'll have a bad moment, or we'll have a bad day, or we'll have a bad season. And the other party has to continue to do and pour in and do all the things. But we have to own our part and we have to apologize. And what a great piece of advice. I want to thank you so much. As I said earlier, it's very personal to me, your book, because while I sit here today, married well for 36 years, my children have benefited as well, because I'm conscious and have been for the last 20 years of their life of the differences between TJ and Kenzie, and how I have to feed in love differently to both of them. Of course, I love both of them, but they're two entirely different people that grew up in exactly the same home, and they need something different. And for all the folks that are out there today, we're going to give away an awful lot of Gary's books, and we are, because this is one of the great treasures. I really believe this, and I believe the idea that you wrote this book for the right reason, and that it sold 14 million copies so far. And I really believe that long after me and you are gone, it's going to continue to sell, because it is a transcendent message. And I want to thank you for having the courage to be a transcendent messenger and delivering the 5 love languages to all of us. Gary, thank you so much for being a part of Personal and Professional Best.
Well, thank you, Patrick. It was good chatting with you today, and the best of everything in your business and all the relationships with the folks who are listening. So thanks for
God bless. God bless you. Yep.
Relationships are the most important part of our lives. If that is true, and it is, then we must become better at relationships if we're to become our personal and our professional best. We need to love everybody better. We need to start at home with our spouse, our significant other, with our children, with our families. We must love everybody better in the workplace. We must love our customers better. And we must love our neighbors better. Simply put, we must love everybody better. Today, I hope and pray that we inspired you to do just that. Today, I hope and pray that we educated you to do just that. Today, we all begin a new chapter, a better chapter, hopefully our best chapter ever. And it begins and it ends with forgiveness. Forgiving ourselves for the choices that we have made and the pain that it's caused others. And forgiving others for the choices that they have made that have caused pain in our lives. Forgiveness was, and it is, the greatest relationship lesson ever taught. It was and it is what turns the light on and keeps the light on in our relationship life. We learned today how to love everybody better. Dr. Gary Chapman is a transcendent messenger with a transcendent message about how to do just that, how to love everybody better, with words of affirmation, with acts of service, with quality time, with gifts, and someday, hopefully sooner than later, with physical touch. Best is about pursuing the light. Best is about forgiveness. Best is about loving everybody better. Our best is waiting. We hope and pray to meet you there.